Welcome back to Beyond the Cards, a Redbridge podcast hosted by your favorite people who love to talk about the payments news that you want to hear most, and usually just the things that we find very interesting. We've got our normal suspects on the call, minus one who I don't know who approved her vacation, probably me. But we're down one host today, but we've got a couple of interesting things to talk about here. So I think the first thing up on our list to talk about is our good friend ESG, environmental, social, governance. For those that don't know, that's what ESG stands for. Comes to us in a story from a payments, cards, and mobile by James Wood. Um, and I think ESG is in a very interesting place right now because, there's in the US, it doesn't seem to be all too popular. Usually it's the E and the S part that seem to have a lot of issues. Um, Particularly right now with the S part. I think things like DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion generally fall under the S category of ESG. And there's obviously a lot of pushback on that. Um, but where we see ESG being a very popular topic to discuss is obviously in Europe. So I don't know, Gab, what did you take out of this?
Yeah, interesting one. So indeed, Europe is we love regulating things before even we create specific services. So I think ESG is seen by the banking sector as an opportunity to become and regain some profitability that was lost over the past years. And actually, we are not seeing yet in payments this topic has been a hot topic, but we think that it could become. We are seeing a lot of traction on ESG for financing, and definitely banks are using this criteria as important thing to propose their services and to propose even better rates for specific services. So I think it's worth keeping an eye on what is going on that area. And basically on payments, what is even the impact in terms of ESG and what can payment company do on that? So something the article is referring to is about the plastic that is used for,
Yeah.
credit cards. Of course, that's a good one. Whether it's recycled plastic or there's no plastic at all with, fully virtual cards, wallet, and these sort of things, that's something that could be leveraged. And also, other things when it comes to hosting and web services and the amount of resources, global,
Electricity. Yeah.
electricity, exactly, the cloud and everything. So I don't think it is, as I was saying, a topic as of today, but I really think that it will become, and I'm really curious to see whether the market will propose better rates, better services, or even if some companies will decide to work with specific corporates, depending on their ESG politics, policies, internal policies, and the rates in the market. So yeah, interesting one. I don't think it's a hot topic for now, but to keep an eye.
I feel like such a noob, but in I think it was like 2019 or 2018, I was helping a luxury retailer um do embark on issuing a gift card program. And it was the first time I had ever seen questions from a company that was like, well, we're really concerned about the type of plastic that they're going to be using to issue these gift cards. We want to know whether it's, virgin plastic, whether it's recycled plastic, whether they're recyclable, whether there can be digital versions to cut down on plastic. And I was like, what? like,
Yeah.
that's a thing? But yes, it is a huge thing. the amount of plastic that goes into issuing cards is, it's a lot. And, you think about, what does your card even look like? It's usually not, there's usually like multiple elements on a card these days. Like maybe it has like a slightly metallic sheen over the top of it. And all of those types of things impact the recyclability of the product. But I think really the big one is just energy usage. Um, you know, Data centers take a massive amount of energy to run. Not only did they take a lot of energy just to run, but they also have to be cooled. So they require typically a lot of air conditioning, because those processing units have to be kept like insanely cold to be able to run well. Like back in my day when I worked for a processor, I know that our data center, a byproduct that we created was ice, because we had to keep the equipment so cold that we just created a lot of ice and we could resell the ice. So kind of crazy to think about. But I can't remember if we were talking about this internally or not, but weren't we talking about whether like there should be interchange categories for like merchants who pass like an ESG certification?
I think we discussed about it, and indeed, I think that that could be the way, especially if the schemes, the networks, want to go into, towards that direction. But that's another thing, because Visa, Mastercard being American, we don't know, as you were saying, in the US, it's not really a topic. It can be controversial. So eventually, that could be led by maybe European local schemes, or even this European initiative with Wiro, the expected, meant to be a local European network, let's say. So yeah, that could be one of the ways to introduce ESG into the payment picture through interchange.
I mean, it would probably get the biggest amount of uptake, because I feel like merchants would gladly do things to save money. But, I think you're right. Like our current political climate, I think, just sees ESG as this big bad guy that's going to cost a lot of money. But I think in the long run, ESG is supposed to save money. But I don't think until there is like truly economic incentives all the way around for all participants that people are going to really want to adopt it. Just because, you almost see greater pushback against merchants who do have a more ESG centric mindset of like, or you have states that are saying like, well, you know, Bank ABC has ESG initiatives, and well, they bank with our state, and so we're not going to allow any government contracts to that bank. And I think that that's, I'd like to remind some states that, there's 50 states, and those banks often operate in different countries as well. So, kind of forcing a bank into that spot just over your personal viewpoint, like, I don't think that's really a good position. But before I get too heretical on that discussion, I think it's a good way to talk about this article that we saw in the BBC, um, which is about, should businesses charge for returns? I don't know. I don't shop online, and not to like be rude. Chelsea, Jasmine, what are
Uh,
your experiences shopping online and returning things?
I'm definitely an online shopper, and I'm probably guilty of buying multiple items to test and sending back some. I will say I've in this article it talks about right, the fee for mailing back packages and kind of that cost of doing business on returns. But then it also mentions, where they'll waive that fee when you bring it in to the store. They won't charge for an in-person return because there's a lot of the shoppers will then spend that money in store. And I, for one, do that. I will order from some different retailers for kids' clothes, for example, just because I don't have time to go to the store, or they just have a low selection in the store, and then I return them to the store and end up spending money, right? So I can understand the need for charging a fee, though, because imagine the sheer volume of returns these stores and retailers are getting back, and just having to section everything back. And then especially on merchandise that might be very selective in terms of when it will sell, like holiday merchandise or whatever. I'm sure they deal with that a lot as well. So, I mean, I can understand the cost of adding a fee for returns, but that's just me personally.
And how I look at it, right, is that I think ever since the pandemic, which I believe most online retailers or retailers, period, just seen an increase of returns. And in my mind, I look at it as the more stuff that can return, the more costly it costs them on the back end. So I'm thinking they're just trying to cover their costs that they're spending for everything. Some of these providers may even charge them a return fee, or a fee to return anything. Honestly, I've never returned anything online. Normally, I'm going back into the store if I order it online. But I have returned some things online, and honestly, I didn't notice that I was paying the fee. I'm gonna be.
I mean, realistically, I just don't return things because it's not worth the hassle for me. I'm like, well, I guess I just have this thing now. I guess I'll just figure out how to use it.
Yeah.
Or I like literally don't know how to return things online. I
mean, Amazon is the king of.
I don't even know how to return something on Amazon, to tell you the truth. I'm like, is there like a button I push? Does it send me like
do they come to my house?
Yeah, like I don't know. I don't know how it works.
Guys, that I started to have this service, that now in Paris, I don't know if it's common in the rest of France or Europe, but they come home and they pick your return and they go with it.
Yes.
So it's pretty nice.
Oh my gosh.
And
Uber does this now.
Oh, yeah.
Uber, you can like schedule someone to come pick up your return and then they just like go and return it for you. That's still, though, I think I'm like, do I have to have a return label? How do I get that return label? Because the reality is I don't have a printer, so it's not like I can just like print out a return label. And like, I also probably don't have tape either. Like, do people randomly have tape in their home?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Or I lose it and then I have to buy a new one.
Buy some more, and then you're going to find it and you're going to like, oh, I got all this tape. But I think that's more risky. Like, I don't know if I could.
The tape?
Not the tape, but far as having someone come and pick up my return, I think that is more risky, because what if it doesn't get to where it's supposed to go, right? You're out money, and the business is still with their, with their money in their hand because it's not returned, but the consumer is out of that money because I trusted you to come return it back. So I don't trust that piece of having someone like Uber come and return my stuff.
That sounds like a you problem.
Have you guys had, I'm on Amazon before, I purchased something, I think it was a shower or like a curtain rod or something, and for whatever reason it was broken, and instead of them even wanting it back, they're like, nope, we've credited it to you, throw it away. And it was literally, yeah. And I've seen they will do that on a few items. I had a lighting company, and I sent it back. Nothing actually wrong with it, and they said, no, it's not worth it for us to actually, pay to get that product back and then put it back on our shelves.
Well, I mean, I think, from a payments perspective, right? Um, you're not going to get that money back in interchange. You
Right.
maybe get 70% back if it's a credit card, probably nothing back if it's a debit card. So I think, you know, businesses, well, no, I'm lying there. I think consumers think that when they return something, like the retailer is made 100% whole when they return something. Because in your mind, you're like, well, you got the thing back. You can just resell it again. And it's like, maybe, but also the retailer's never made 100% whole. They will forever lose money on returns. Um, and I do like how this article does mention, since we were just talking about sustainability, that there's like some reference to sustainability in here. Um, I mean, I think the real thing is obviously the companies that are having the most interesting policies tend to be the companies that sell you a lot of things for very inexpensive amounts. And, potentially the things that they sell you may only last 2 or 3 washes anyway. So they're like, yeah, we don't even want it back. I don't know. Maybe is this like, should I try to learn how to return things?
I mean, if you start buying in
Yeah.
quantity. Also, just between now and the beginning of the pandemic, there's been such a shift in this, I don't know what you call it, like high volume, low cost merchandise. I mean, there's always been that, but I think there's just so much more access. Like
fast fashion.
Yeah. Sheen. I don't know how do you say it.
Shein. I call it Shein,
I mean, Temu.
Fashion Nova, all of that.
Yeah, just
Temu,
whatever.
Oh, I call it Temu, sorry.
They just completely
don't want to live the same way.
Okay, everyone put on your tinfoil hats. I think this is a conspiracy. So I love jingles. And so I remember when Temu first came out, their shopping like a billionaire commercial, it said Temu. And then I don't know if anyone caught it. They re-released it to say Temu. And then in their more recent commercial, it says Temu. But I will die on this hill that it was originally launched and they said Temu.
I honestly always thought it was Temu, so
I've probably called it both. Who knows?
Oh.
All I'm saying is I bet you that exists out there somewhere. Someone has the original recording.
I was just going to say, regarding...
Drop a link in the comments.
Yes, drop a link. But also on this article, I wanted to add, I can also see the return fees being, not I won't say necessary, but I can see why a lot of e-commerce retailers are implementing the fee, because the e-commerce, their volume is steady going up, and a lot of people are not going in stores anymore. So the cost of shipping it and everything, I can understand exactly why these fees are being implemented and pushed on to the consumer. Like, hey, you got to pay for something. We've paid for all of this to get it to you. Now you have to do something at least to get it back to us.
Yeah. So our next story comes from Engadget. And I know I feel like we always talk about Apple on this podcast. I feel like a large amount of minutes have been dedicated to this. But this one is really interesting, and it just kind of like, especially with the Department of Justice, filing that antitrust case against Apple, that should be a fun thing to watch. We'll probably talk about it nonstop. But this one is like very specifically over Apple Pay. And, and for those that don't know, like Apple Pay, Google Pay, these aren't special payment networks, right? Like there is no Apple Pay network that exists. They're just whatever card you loaded into that wallet, is the card that's there. And the interchange fees and network fees are attached to whatever, payment method is loaded into your Apple Pay. And so this kind of alleges that, the Apple Pay functionality, could have been a nascent new network, right? It could have been its own Apple Pay network, but that Visa and MasterCard swooped in and, allegedly offered cash bribes to encourage Apple to not develop its own payment network and keep everything on the Visa, MasterCard, Discover, American Express rails. I'll throw everybody in there. They're referred to as the entrenched networks. And are claiming that that's anti-competitive behavior. I don't know if it's anti-competitive behavior because I'm not a legal expert. But I would imagine that since you can attach any credit card into Apple Pay, you would have a really hard time claiming that that's anti-competitive.
I was just about to say that. I was like, with all of the cards that you can add, whether it's even a Visa, MasterCard, not the actual Apple card, but wouldn't it still be related to the Visa and MasterCard fees anyway? And it'll just be a contactless fall under that instead of having its own Apple having its own initial tap to pay fee. I wouldn't see why it doesn't go with Visa and MasterCard. I would see why they would have to bribe them. I'm confused.
Yeah. I mean, I think there is something to say about the actual NFC technology, and maybe cryptographic technology wrapped up into Apple Pay, and whether other providers can use that or whether other apps would be supported on the iPhone using that specific technology. I think there's an argument there, right? I do think that's walled garden, that I do think is anti-competitive, but I don't necessarily see the other side as being anti-competitive.
I think the one thing that I found on another linked article here was the fact that if you have an Android, right, those merchants, they don't have to pay an extra, there's no markup. They're just paying the same rate versus the Apple Pay. When someone uses that, it's actually going to cost them more. And now, of course, it's a marketplace, right? They can add a fee, but they're essentially having, you have to accept both, right? And so in a way, they're being penalized when they take the Apple Pay over an Android Pay. It's not called Android Pay, right? But the wallet on Androids.
Yeah, the Google Pay and Samsung Pay and all of those.
Don't shame me for being a Google fanboy.
And do you guys
think that there's something maybe to do with that also local networks or local payment methods? Because what we've seen here in France and in general, I think in Europe with Apple Pay, that the first card, when there was a co-branded card, the first card that was accepted, the only scheme that was accepted was Visa or MasterCard and not the local network. And that was quite, important here because first fees increased significantly when payments go through Apple Pay instead of standard one, because then you can of course route to the least expensive scheme. So are you seeing that in the US as well, or nothing to do with local networks?
No, I mean, I know that if I go and use Google Pay at a merchant and it's the debit card I load in, I can route to a local debit network if I want to. I think really the question about that is, did Apple make it harder for local networks to be able to use Apple Pay? But I don't think I've ever seen an additional fee for Apple Pay or Google Pay being added to a merchant statement or a merchant contract. Usually it's like the same price as everything else. Now, if there's fees that come through specifically from Apple or Google, because you have to get like your own special like Apple Pay Mid or Google Pay Mid that like gets integrated in. If there's an additional fee there, I personally haven't seen it. And I think if you are paying an extra fee for somebody using Apple Pay, I'd probably say that's not a fee you need to be paying. All right. Because we talk about Apple so much, let's talk about Airbnb. Which, ultimately gets to our main story, right, about marketplaces. So Airbnb, adding a guest services fee of 2% for cross-currency bookings, right? I think from a user perspective, to me, and just knowing what I know, a 2% cross-currency booking fee being added sounds very close to the typical cross-currency markup that I see. So this is really, to me, someone passing their FX spread down the line.
That's exactly what it is. That's what I looked at. Is like, oh, okay, you're just passing this fee over to the customer so it can kind of cancel itself out.
Agreed.
But of course, as the article says, it's not presented that way. It's just an additional services that you're using, so you're paying for it.
Well, and of course, it's really like getting into the, and I think like didn't Airbnb recently say they're going to try to like limit some of these fees, or at least maybe just on the cleaning fees. But I think this is the challenge of operating a marketplace, right? If you are a hotel chain, you have your FX negotiated to within an inch of its life. You're probably using DCC. It's probably easier for you to manage, but this raises to our kind of main story, which is, this is to me clearly something born out of the fact that Airbnb is a marketplace, and marketplaces provide a lot of advanced features to people who participate on them. But at some point, either as an individual, maybe it may never make sense for you to leave something like an Airbnb. But if you're like using one of the other marketplaces, I'm thinking of like an Etsy or something, right? Or somebody who starts up on Shopify. At what point does your business grow that being on those platforms doesn't make sense for you anymore? Do you guys think that there is a natural size of business to where, hey, you're running so much volume through this marketplace that you probably need to go out on your own?
I can see that, but as far as a consumer, I think not a consumer, but as far as a business that's on the marketplace, me personally, I would keep it on there because it's easier to manage. A lot of people don't have the marketing skills to, whether my business does grow or not, a lot of people don't have the marketing skills to handle it on their own. So they continue to use a marketplace to offer their business. So I don't see.
Strong disagree.
I think too, it depends on their growth plan. If they're trying to expand, maybe let's say into new audiences, or maybe there's a different customer base that they don't feel like is coming in through that marketplace. That could be, one reason. And then really looking at their brand, and do they have as much control as they would want? I think there's going to be times where they don't have the control and oversight because they don't own it, to, I guess, brand it how they want, or target how they want, because it's more of a generic.
Yes.
Yeah. So I disagreed with you there, Jasmine, because I think that promotion via Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, writing those algorithms is the path to success, really. And it's like, if you just went to that marketplace, right, where you're like, I think I'm just gonna troll Etsy for a maker of some unique jewelry, right? I think it's actually harder to find those individuals searching through the marketplace than finding them on social media and following a link. I think what these marketplaces generally provide, and my friend just launched their own business, and they asked me should I launch on Shopify? Should I launch on Etsy? How should I do this? And I had to ask them, I was like, okay, well, if you're thinking about it, do you want to be responsible for answering orders and having to ship them timely? Do you need customer service help? Is there any tax issues or use tax that you're going to need to follow to make sure that your finances are in order? And a lot of these marketplaces are embedding finance features into them, which definitely makes them more attractive to the, I guess I would say hobbyist or side hustle. But if your side hustle starts breaking $1 million in sales or $5 million in sales, does it make sense that you leave? And I think part of the other point here is it's not like they make it easy for you to leave.
They don't make it easy for you to leave at all. I think some marketplaces want you to continue to stay. Of course, it's costing them. They're making revenue off you, right?
100.
And they're offering different things that, they're like, oh, we'll take this up for you. For instance, I had an Airbnb at one point. I offered it online. I didn't really market it to anyone. It was really by word, and they took care of everything for me. Airbnb. I didn't have to do anything but approve. That was it. Really, extend a stay. All of the fees were implemented right there for me. I didn't really have to sit up and kind of implement all these other different fees, like the service fee, all of that, of course, all those fees. But I didn't want to get off of it. I didn't see why I would leave and try to do it on my own, if that makes sense. Make my own website for the Airbnb.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you're a ceramicist, right? Or just somebody who is very artisanal, right? Unless you're selling a lot, sure, that probably makes sense, because at least one of the things that I've seen is that they'll be like, oh yes, you can leave us, or you can have your own website and your own payment processing, because let's not forget, the payment processing is locked into that ecosystem. So whatever they tell you that you're supposed to pay is what you're supposed to pay, and they control all of that. And so I've seen in a couple cases where if you want to use all of the other features, but you don't want their payment processing, they will charge you 100 basis points sometimes to do that. And that's where I have an issue, which is, oh, well, there's the trap. Because probably going out and getting your own processing contract plus their 100 basis points, it's cost prohibitive to leave them. So unless you're really ready to say, okay, I do not need these services that they provide me anymore. I am going to in-house these. I think you're kind of stuck. And I feel like that's the trap.
Yeah, I think actually there are two big risks, and I agree with most of the things you guys are saying about the size. I think there is a critical size. I wouldn't have a number in mind, but definitely marketplaces are good to explore and to expand and to learn. But then at some point, they are also taking a big portion of your margin. So creating your own channel, it can be at some point interesting because the margin is much higher, and you're also diversifying the risk of the dependency on that marketplace. If at some point the marketplace doesn't like you, they can just kick you out. So I think that's also important to keep in mind, the risk of being kicked out, and not only actually the cost or even commercials, is that the fact that your activity is at risk. So when it grows, you need to diversify.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we've all seen the stories of sellers on marketplaces where the marketplace just stops funding them.
Yeah.
So it's like, your cash flow can be interrupted and they can hold your money for as long as they want until you fulfill whatever it is they're asking you to fulfill. And so I know that like Chelsea and I have had a couple of these where, a larger merchant acquires a smaller one, right? And they'll come to us and they'll say, "Oh, well, they use XYZ to power their e-commerce." And we're always just kind of like, they're like, "Well, should we just absorb them into our contract, or like what should we do? Because we can't bring them onto like our order system or fulfillment ecosystem. We can't board them into all of our customer service. So what should we do? We don't want to pay the fees that they're having to pay over there." And a lot of times we kind of have to be like, until you can get them off of what they're using, probably just keep them there.
Yeah.
And sometimes they've been, I feel like one was like 80 million a year. So I'm like, is 80 million the limit? Like, I think it's something you have to consider. And like, you know, there's that advice to kind of those larger merchants, but I think, for anyone out there who's thinking of, starting a business, right? You really do have to think about like what that business means to you. Is this something you want to grow and prosper? And, you know, do you want a huge portion of that business to be controlled by somebody who has different ideas than you?
Mm-hmm. Another piece of it goes into like your data, right? What information are you able to access and do you need versus, they can't just create custom things for every single merchant or company that partners with them, so that oftentimes may not be at the forefront of your idea or when you start things up, but then later on when you want those analytics, what are you able to extract out, and
So smart.
pull?
You're so smart for that. Yeah, like they have all of the shoppers' emails, right? They control the list of how you access those. So do you
Good
just
point,
get that?
because I know I've talked with a type of business that had a lot of reoccurring revenue, right? That was what they did. And they were so nervous to leave because, I mean, that's a serious change and they're going to lose a significant portion because of how that's being held.
Yeah, and I remember when the big conversation, especially around like the pandemic was, the food delivery service marketplaces, right? Where restaurants were complaining about how much money they had to pay to be on those platforms. Sometimes as much as like 30, 40, 50% went to the marketplace. And, you know, it's such a catch 22 of, hey, that does create a lot more business for us than we would have not had before, but the margins just don't work out. And, I think that's why you see also a lot of like larger food vendors don't participate on those, right? They want you to come to their online ordering or order through their app because they have the means and resources to build that out because they're like, I'm not giving away that money to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Like, isn't Domino's one? I don't know.
Oh
I'm
yeah,
vegan, so I,
Domino's
I
has
can't
they're like
order
the best they're like the best story ever for creating their own I guess you could call it marketplace.
delivery
It's
app.
yeah, it's so interactive. I will say I've used it many times.
Who hasn't?
And it tracks like here's where your pizza is. It's in the oven, you know?
Yeah.
Um it's super handy and it's easy to use, right? That's what people want.
And it's like, I get it. It's like yeah, but do people want to download another app? And it's kind of like, they will.
Yeah, but the cool thing is you can even do it from their browser and it'll keep
Yeah,
up. You can keep like checking in and it'll
Yeah.
just update for
Mhm.
you.
that's
Yeah, that's
very
true.
true.
That
But
is
I
so
think,
true.
I think the whole food delivery conversation also is just, again, emblematic of all of this too, right? You're a local restaurant, you have to make the decision, right? Do you want to have your own delivery drivers? Do you need to host your own platform so that people can deliver? There's infrastructure costs that go into doing that. So, part of me is I understand why you're complaining about how much money they're taking, but at the same time, it's like, well, how much would it cost you to build that out yourself if you would even do it?
That is a good question. A lot of people, if it is a costly, no matter if they're going to recoup their money anyway by implementing that, they don't want to. They don't want to spend it.
Very true. I have seen
I've seen it too. We've
restaurants,
both seen it.
yep, that used to be on those apps that are like, yep, nope, we don't use that anymore. Interesting conversation. I think I definitely think it's something that is really impactful for the small small mid-sized business SMB world. I think, a lot of times when we think about the costs of doing business, etc., I think the big names drive a lot of conversation, but it's really these little companies that get saddled with the excesses of cost. And some of it is, I think, a true business decision. If you're going out there and you're wanting to start a business, you really have to plan this stuff out, right? You're either comfortable paying that and you've increased your prices to make it worth it and you can attract the audience to make it uh, profitable for you, or you have to decide that you're just not going to go down that route. And I think that's the challenge of like everyone's an entrepreneur. I'm like, I don't know if that's true. I think there's a lot of very talented people who can have an amazing ability to create, and it's cool that they're able to get their products out there, but I guess it really just depends on what you're intending to do with it. Am I cynical? Am I a cynic? I think I am.
I don't think so.
Me out here crushing everybody who wants to start a small business, being like, well, you don't have the right
You
wherewithal
won't
to
make
start that
it.
business.
Okay, it's like, oh well, I'm already feeling. He just said it.
Well,
Hey,
it's one of those things where it's like, in my career, I've always seen the SMBs have to take the highest costs out of everybody. You know, it's one of those things where it's like, when I see stories about the fees that merchants are paying, and they're like, yeah, sometimes they're over 3%. And I'm like, my mind explodes of being like, I don't understand that. Like, that's way too much money. That shouldn't be happening. And then I remember there's all of these integrated services, either into marketplaces or other kind of SMB platforms to help you get out there, where I'm like, oh yeah, that is all just part of their cost. And I think you have to remember that as, hey, yeah, that it cost me 3.25% for every transaction on this marketplace. But then it's like, okay, yeah, that's expensive. I don't like that. That's probably way more than the actual cost of payment. But what are you not paying for? Right? Like, you don't have a shipping person, you don't have an extra employee, you don't have a customer service person who's going to respond to these things. You don't have to worry about it if the package doesn't make it to where it needs to go. So there's always a cost of doing everything, and unfortunately, SMBs seem to be the ones who pick it up the most. Well, is that our episode, folks?
Well, we hit on a lot of things. So.
We did.
we did hit on
Yeah,
a lot
we
of
did.
things.
Oh, we did. All right. Well, if you enjoyed listening to our episode, like, subscribe, share if you could. It really does help us out. Everyone's talking about the dangers of algorithms. We would just like you to find us and let the algorithm take you further into our rabbit hole of discussion. But thank you so much for joining, and we'll catch you next month.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.